Red is the perfect color for magic. Red is the color of the earth, of flames, and of the blood that flows through the stars. For some reason, I really like these stories about some special, talented, red-haired girl in a cool fantasy setting. So, Mahoutsukai no Yome, or in English, The Ancient Magus Bride. I'm never quite sure whether it's Magus or Magus. I think probably Magus. But I don't really like the English title because I'm not sure where they got ancient from. It's not really in the Japanese. The Japanese is just The Magician's Bride. So this show is based on a manga by Kora Yamazaki, and the basic plot is there's this girl, her name is Chise, and she has both an incredible amount of latent magical power within her, which makes her this being known as a sleighbeggy, and on top of that, she also can see ghosts and yokai and all that kind of stuff, and unfortunately it makes her life so hard because she's rejected by humans and she's an outcast that at the beginning of this series she sells herself at a slave auction as an alternative to suicide. It's really a downer beginning because she's just given up on life to such an extent that she's like, well, I don't have any use for my life, but maybe someone else will, so here, have whatever magical ability I have. And luckily or unluckily for her, she ends up purchased by this British mage whose name is Elias Ainsworth, although I guess in English you'd probably pronounce it Elias, but in the Japanese they pronounce it Elias, and he's quite a strange creature himself. He is, you find out later, he's kind of half fairy, half human. His face looks like a deer skull, so he has very little expression. He has horns, he's much taller than a normal human, and he decides that, hey, he'd like an apprentice, so he buys the main character. And then it turns out he also would like to marry her someday, just to make it that much creepier. And for the rest of the show, it's really about like her learning magic and the relationship between the two characters and them getting into all kinds of magical trouble and finding a way to get out of magical trouble. I wouldn't call this show necessarily a guilty pleasure for me because it is like very well written, very well animated, very well produced. Like, it is a good show. I guess I would call it more of a problematic fave because I have to admit that a lot of the weirdness and the darker elements are a big draw for me. Like, the relationship between Chise and Elias, the fact that he's like very weird and mysterious and he's older and he's not quite human, and the fact that there actually isn't a lot about their romantic relationship. It's very chaste and non-sexual most of the time. Like, there's one bathing scene and like they kiss, like she kisses him on the forehead very chastely, and like he thinks that's awesome. Like, the fact that it went so creepy but there's actually pretty much no sex going on, like I would have found that so appealing and also very safe as a teen, and I think the show would have made a huge impression on me if I had seen it at that age. Like, I would have thought like they were the best couple ever, which is probably not what you're supposed to be thinking, but it is a fantasy and I think I would have had a lot of fun with it. So the pluses for this series, it has a gorgeous color scheme. There's such a nice warm palette with the landscapes and the interiors. It's so beautiful and so cozy. I love the way that Chise's red hair contrasts with her green coat even. It's just so beautiful to look at. The characters are very likable. Obviously, Chise is very likable. She's like very serious and she doesn't have big reactions to a lot of things, but you can tell like she thinks over things deeply, and when someone's in trouble, she really cares and she really tries to help, even if she has to make sacrifices to do so. And a lot of the magical creatures and people she meet are also like very fun and very likable, and even some almost throwaway characters that appear in just a couple episodes and the story would work fine without them. They're drawn in such a subtle way that you find yourself really connecting with them, and that's one of the things I love about this show. And obviously the relationship between Chise and Elias is very interesting, the way they go back and forth, and as they go on, they set more rules about how they should interact with each other, so that they can understand each other better. I think that's a really fun part of the show and makes it interesting to watch. One minus with the anime, and a lot of the people will discuss that if you read reviews and articles about it, is that they kind of really ramped up the pacing at the end of the second season, like the last 6 episodes or so, and some major developments got brought up and then solved a little bit too quickly, and I feel like this would have worked better as a 26 episode series rather than a 24 episode series, and it feels like the story merited a little more development in those areas. I would recommend this for probably 13 and up, definitely for adults. I think it could also be fun for teens. There are some darker scenes, there's some gore, there's some scenes of the characters being in danger or in pain that could be a little bit too intense for younger kids, but I think it's handled pretty tastefully overall, so 13 and up, it should be fine. Definitely recommend for any fans of fairy tales or Celtic mythology, because it draws very heavily on the folklore of that area, and I think that's something that gives a lot of depth to the setting and is fun to watch if you know these stories and you know these characters. So overall, a really fun series, like very different from a lot of the other anime that are out there, and definitely a recommendation for anyone who's a fan of fantasy. Thanks for watching! This is my familiar. His name is Tekka. He helps me do magic. Actually, he doesn't help me do any magic. He's pretty useless, but I still love him anyway. I love you, Tekka.